The city never truly slept. It only pretended to rest between sirens, footsteps, and the distant hum of traffic that echoed like a restless heartbeat. Neon lights flickered above the streets, glowing reflections in puddles left behind by an earlier rain. People moved quickly, coats pulled tight, eyes fixed forward, each one chasing somewhere else, something else. And there he sat. On a cracked stretch of sidewalk near a closed storefront, hunched beneath a faded awning that no longer kept the rain out. His jacket was too thin for the season, its sleeves frayed at the cuffs, its zipper broken so it never quite closed. Cold air slipped inside, settling against his ribs like a quiet reminder that winter didn't care who you used to be. At his feet rested a cardboard sign. The edges were soft and worn, the words uneven from a marker that had long ago begun to run dry. Anything helps. He didn't remember when he'd first written it. Days blurred together when you stopped counting them. Time became less about dates and more about surviving from one hour to the next, finding a warm corner, a bite to eat, a moment where the shaking in your hands finally slowed. People passed him without stopping. Some pretended they hadn't seen him. Others saw him too clearly and chose to look away. A man in a pressed coat stepped around him as if avoiding a puddle. A woman tightened her grip on her purse. A group of friends laughed loudly as they passed, their voices fading into the night like music from a world he no longer belonged to. Once, he had belonged somewhere. He used to wake up to an alarm clock. Used to complain about traffic. Used to have a key in his pocket and a name people called with familiarity instead of pity or worse, silence. But life had a way of taking things quietly at first. A job lost. Bills piling up. A marriage strained beyond repair. Then it took things loudly. An eviction notice taped to a door. A final argument that ended with slammed doors and words you couldn't take back. A phone that stopped ringing because there was no one left to call. Now, his world was reduced to what he could carry. A threadbare blanket. A backpack with a few clothes. Memories that weighed more than any physical thing ever could. His stomach twisted with hunger, but it was the loneliness that hurt more. Hunger dulled after a while. Loneliness only sharpened. He watched reflections in the storefront glass, faces passing by, whole lives moving forward without him. For a moment, he wondered if he was becoming invisible. Not metaphorically, but truly unseen, as if the world had quietly decided it no longer needed him in the frame. A gust of wind sent his sign tumbling onto its side. He didn't rush to pick it up. What was the point? His hands trembled as he pulled them deeper into his sleeves. The cold crept into his bones, but there was a colder thought settling in his chest, one he'd been fighting for weeks. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is all I am now. He thought of the nights he'd stared at the ceiling of borrowed couches, of shelters filled beyond capacity, of park benches that never quite let you sleep. He thought of how heavy mornings felt when there was nothing waiting for you on the other side of waking up. Around him, the city kept moving. A bus hissed as it stopped at the corner. A couple argued quietly as they walked past. Somewhere, music played from a passing car, the bass vibrating through the pavement. Life was happening. Just not for him. He lowered his head, his breath fogging in the cold air. Words slipped from his mouth before he could stop them, barely louder than a whisper, meant only for himself. I'm tired. Not tired in the way sleep could fix. Tired in the way hope wears thin when it's been stretched too many times. For a long moment, he closed his eyes. The noise of the city dulled, and all he could hear was his own breathing, slow, uneven, fragile. He wondered what it would feel like to stop trying. To stop hoping. To simply disappear. Then something changed. Footsteps slowed. Not hurried. Not avoiding. They stopped right in front of him. He opened his eyes. Someone was standing there, close enough that he could see the steam of their breath in the cold night air. And for the first time in a long while, Someone was looking directly at him. He wasn't sure how long he'd been staring when he realized she hadn't moved. Most people pause just long enough to decide not to stop. A half-second hesitation, a glance, then the familiar sound of footsteps speeding up. But this woman stood there as if time had loosened its grip on her. The street lights painted her coat in soft gold, and snowflakes clung to the dark fabric of her sleeves. She didn't tower over him. She didn't keep her distance. She knelt down. The simple act startled him more than if she'd shouted his name. No one knelt anymore. Kneeling meant effort. It meant choosing closeness instead of comfort. "Hi," she said gently, as if they were meeting for the first time instead of standing on opposite sides of a life most people refuse to see. He swallowed, unsure how to respond. His voice felt rusty, unused. "Hi." Her eyes flicked to the cardboard sign lying on its side. She picked it up, brushed off the damp edge, and set it back against the wall where it wouldn't blow away again. She did it carefully, like it mattered. "What's your name?" she asked. The question landed harder than he expected. Names were anchors. They tied you to memories, to places, to people who once said them with warmth. He hadn't introduced himself in so long that for a second, he wondered if he still deserved one. "Daniel," he said finally. She smiled. Not the polite kind meant to soften discomfort, but the kind that reached her eyes. "I'm Maria." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small cup with a lid. Steam curled into the air between them. "Coffee," she said. "It's cold tonight." He hesitated. Pride flared weakly, then faded. He took it with shaking hands. The warmth seeped into his palms, and he realized how long it had been since something had felt good without hurting first. "Thank you," he murmured. They sat there together for a moment, the city rushing past them as if they were part of the scenery. She didn't check her phone. Didn't rush him. Just waited. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "Longer than I thought I would be." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. He took a sip of the coffee. It was too hot, and he winced slightly, but the burn felt grounding. "Real. Alive." "What happened?" she asked softly. No one ever asked that question without already assuming the answer. Drugs. Bad choices. Laziness. He could hear the unspoken judgments in the silence people left behind. But she waited. So he told her at least part of it. He told her about the job that disappeared when the company downsized. About trying to keep up with rent while searching for work that never came fast enough. About the night sleeping in his car until the car was gone too. He didn't mention the divorce. Didn't mention how ashamed he felt every time he passed a mirror. Maria listened. Really listened. No interruptions. No advice disguised as concern. Just attention. "I'm sorry," she said when he finished. 2 words. But they carried weight. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in paper. "I made extra this morning," she said. "Didn't know who it was for. Guess I do now." He laughed quietly, surprised at the sound of it. The laugh startled him. It had been so long since it had escaped naturally. As he ate, warmth returned to places he'd forgotten existed. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. "You don't have to fix everything," she said after a moment. "Just tonight." The words settled deep inside him. People were always talking about starting over as if it were a single brave decision. But she made it sound smaller. Manageable. One night. One moment. She stood up slowly, brushing off her knees. He felt a flicker of panic. This was usually the part where people left. But she didn't walk away right away. Instead, she pulled a small folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and placed it in his hand. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 9 o'clock. He looked down at the paper. An address. A phone number. Handwritten. "What's this?" he asked. "A place," she said. "With people who believe in second chances." She met his eyes again, steady and certain. "You don't have to go. But if you do, tell them Maria sent you." Then she smiled once more and stepped back into the stream of moving lives. He watched until she disappeared around the corner. The coffee cup sat empty beside him. The sandwich wrapper rested on his knee. The folded paper felt heavier than it should have. For the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a quiet invitation. Daniel didn't unfold the paper right away. He sat there long after Maria had disappeared, listening to the city breathe around him. The paper rested in his palm, thin and ordinary, yet it felt heavier than anything he owned. He'd been given things before: coins dropped without eye contact, leftovers handed over quickly, but this was different. This came with expectation. With the dangerous suggestion that tomorrow might matter. He folded his fingers around it, as if afraid the words might escape. The night grew colder. He wrapped his blanket tighter and lay back against the brick wall, staring up at a slice of dark sky between buildings. His mind replayed the moment again and again: her kneeling down, the coffee, the way she said his name like it still meant something. People like that don't just appear, a voice inside him warned. And they don't always stay. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Hope, he knew, was not a soft thing. It cut when it failed. It reopened wounds you'd carefully learned to live with. More than once, he'd believed someone who promised help, only to discover there were conditions attached: forms he couldn't fill out, rules he couldn't meet, waiting lists that stretched longer than his patience could survive. Eventually, disappointment trained you to stop reaching. He slept lightly that night, waking at every sound. When morning came, it came quietly, with pale light slipping between buildings and the chill of dawn settling deep into his bones. The street looked different in daylight: less forgiving. More honest. Daniel sat up slowly, joints aching. For a moment, he forgot about the paper. Then he felt it. Still there. Folded. Real. He opened it. The address was written neatly, the ink slightly smudged as if it had been written in a hurry. Below it, a phone number. Nothing fancy. No promises. Just a place and a time. 9 o'clock. He checked the sky. Morning was already moving fast. People were heading to work, coffee cups in hand, conversations drifting past him like leaves on water. "You could stay," the voice whispered. "No one would blame you." Staying was familiar. Staying was safe. Staying meant he wouldn't have to explain himself, wouldn't have to risk being turned away again. Going meant facing the possibility of rejection. Of walking into a building and being seen not as invisible, but as a problem someone might decide they didn't have time for. He stood up. The decision surprised him as much as anything else had in months. He folded the blanket, stuffed it into his backpack, and slung it over his shoulder. His reflection in the storefront window looked tired, older than he remembered. But there was something else there too, something tentative, like the first crack of light through a long-sealed door. The walk took nearly 40 minutes. Each step felt like it carried weight. The farther he went, the more doubts crowded in. What if the place was closed? What if they left? What if Maria had just been trying to be kind and hadn't thought about what it would cost him to hope? He slowed as the address came into view. The building was small. Brick. Unassuming. A simple sign near the door read: Community Outreach Center. No banners. No dramatic slogans. Just a door. Daniel stopped across the street. His chest tightened. His feet refused to move. He could still turn back. Still pretend this moment never existed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper again. The edges were creased now, softened by his hands. Proof that the night before hadn't been a dream. He crossed the street. Inside, the air was warm. The smell of coffee and something freshly baked filled the space. Voices echoed softly from somewhere deeper inside: laughter, conversation, life. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she said. His throat tightened. I was told to come here. Maria sent me." The woman's smile widened, as if she'd been expecting him. "You must be Daniel." The sound of his name nearly undid him. She handed him a clipboard. "You're right on time." Right on time. No one had said that to him in years. As he took the clipboard, he realized something slowly, carefully, like stepping onto thin ice and finding it held. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a rescue. But it was a door. And for the first time in a very long while, he had chosen to walk through it. The clipboard felt heavier than it should have. Daniel held it close as he followed the woman down a narrow hallway lined with bulletin boards. Flyers overlapped one another: job training schedules, meal times, counseling hours, handwritten notes that read "You matter" and "One step at a time." The walls weren't fancy, but they were warm, painted in colors that didn't rush you. "This way," the woman said kindly. "You can call me Ruth." She opened a door at the end of the hall, and the noise from the rest of the building softened behind them. Inside was a small office with 2 chairs and a desk worn smooth by years of use. A window let in the pale morning light. "Have a seat," Ruth said. Daniel sat, perching on the edge like he might be asked to leave at any second. His hands tightened around the pen as he looked down at the form. Name. Date of birth. Last address. He hesitated. Ruth noticed. "You don't have to fill everything out right now," she said. "We can take it slow." Slow. The word loosened something in his chest. They talked not like an interview, not like an interrogation. She asked what he needed most right now. Food. A place to shower. Clean clothes. He answered honestly, surprised by how good it felt not to pretend. Within minutes, things began to shift. A warm meal waited in a small dining room filled with quiet conversation. He ate without rushing, savoring every bite, not out of desperation but gratitude. Afterward, someone showed him to a locker room where clean towels were folded neatly on a bench. The water in the shower steamed, washing away days of exhaustion, grime, and something heavier: shame. He stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting the heat soak into him until his hands stopped shaking. When he dressed in clean clothes, simple, donated, but he barely recognized himself in the mirror. His face looked less hollow. His eyes, still tired, held a faint spark. The rest of the day unfolded gently. There was a caseworker who talked to him about temporary housing options. A volunteer who showed him how to use the center's computer lab to search for jobs. No promises of instant success, just realistic steps. Reasonable expectations. "This is a process," the caseworker said. "But you won't be doing it alone." Those words stayed with him. Days turned into weeks. Daniel got a small cot in a shared transitional space: quiet, safe, predictable. Predictability became a gift. He learned the rhythm of the place: breakfast at 7, job searches in the morning, group meetings in the afternoon. Some nights were still hard. The past didn't disappear just because the present improved. Memories crept in when the lights went out: mistakes, regrets, the echo of a life that once was. But something had changed. He woke up with somewhere to be. A month later, he was offered a part-time maintenance job through a local partnership. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much. But it was honest. It was steady. On his first day, he stood in the break room staring at his name written on a schedule board. Daniel. Printed. Official. Real. He worked hard. Showed up early. Stayed late when asked. Not because he was afraid of losing it but because it felt good to be needed again. Slowly, he began to stand differently. His shoulders stopped curling inward. He started making eye contact. Smiling, even. One afternoon, while sweeping the hallway of the outreach center, the same hallway he'd once walked down clutching a clipboard, he paused. He watched as a man not much younger than himself sat hunched in a chair, staring at the floor with the same defeated posture Daniel knew too well. For a moment, the memory hit him so hard he had to steady himself. Then he walked over. "First day?" Daniel asked. The man nodded. "It gets easier," Daniel said. "Not all at once. But it does." The words surprised him. They were true. That night, Daniel found the folded paper in his backpack, the one Maria had given him. The edges were worn now, the ink faded from handling. He smoothed it out carefully and placed it inside his wallet. Not as a reminder of where he'd been, but as proof of where one small choice had led. And he realized something quietly, almost reverently. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the moment it turned. The sidewalk looked smaller than Daniel remembered. The same cracked concrete. The same flickering streetlight. The same storefront window reflecting passing lives. But Daniel was different. He stood there now instead of sitting, his jacket zipped, his boots worn but solid beneath his feet. In his hands was a cardboard tray of coffee cups, steam rising into the evening air like quiet prayers. The city still rushed past, still too busy to notice most things, but Daniel noticed everything. Especially the man sitting against the wall. The man's shoulders were hunched the same way Daniel's once were. His eyes carried the same exhaustion, the kind that came from being unseen for too long. A cardboard sign rested near his feet, the words barely legible. "Anything helps." Daniel felt the memory hit him in the chest, sharp and familiar. He crossed the street. The man looked up warily as Daniel approached, bracing himself for judgment or dismissal. Instead, Daniel knelt down. The motion felt sacred. "Hey," Daniel said gently. "It's cold tonight." He handed the man a cup of coffee. The man hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. "Thanks," he murmured. Daniel stayed. He asked the man's name. Listened when the story came out in pieces: lost job, nowhere to go, too much pride worn down by too many closed doors. Daniel didn't rush him. Didn't interrupt. He knew better now. Before leaving, Daniel pulled a small folded paper from his wallet. He'd rewritten it many times over the months, careful with the ink, intentional with the words. An address. A time. A name. "If you're serious about starting over," Daniel said, "go here tomorrow morning. Tell them Daniel sent you." The man stared at the paper like it might vanish. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "Because someone once helped me." As Daniel walked away, the city felt different. Not kinder. Not slower. But fuller. As if his place in it had finally been restored. He didn't tell people his story often. Not because he was ashamed, but because it felt personal, like a fragile thing best shared through action instead of words. But sometimes, when the outreach center hosted community dinners, he spoke. He talked about how close he'd come to giving up. About the power of being seen. About how one small act of kindness didn't erase his problems but gave him the strength to face them. He always ended the same way. "Don't underestimate what a moment can do," he said. "You might think it's small. But to someone else, it could be everything." Months passed. Then one evening, as Daniel was cleaning up after dinner, he saw a familiar face step through the door. Maria. She stood near the entrance, looking around with the same quiet warmth he remembered. When their eyes met, recognition flashed across her face. Daniel walked toward her, heart pounding. "You came," he said. She smiled. "I heard you work here now." He nodded. "I do. I wanted to say thank you." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For stopping," he said. "That night. When you didn't have to." Maria's eyes softened. "I didn't change your life, Daniel." He shook his head gently. "No. But you changed how I saw it." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by voices and warmth and the quiet proof of second chances unfolding all around them. Later that night, Daniel stepped outside. The air was cold, but it no longer felt cruel. He looked up at the city lights and thought about how close he'd come to disappearing. And how one small act of kindness had changed everything. Not by saving him, but by reminding him he was worth saving.